Hi, everyone. Welcome to our very first edition of Gameday Central Extra alongside EJ Smith. I'm Olivia Reiner. We have a lot of Eagles news headlines to discuss, and we're looking forward to sharing all of our insights and analysis with you most weeks. So I think, EJ, let's just start with the big news that came out of yesterday as the Eagles come off the bye and into their next matchup against the Cleveland Browns here in Week 6 is the fact that linebacker Devin White is no longer on the team. The Eagles released him. And it was an interesting trajectory for Devin White since he joined this team in the offseason, signed a one-year deal with the Eagles. He pretty much took all of the first team, most of the first team first team inside linebacker reps throughout training camp. And then Nakobe Dean ultimately won the starting middle inside linebacker job alongside Zach Bond. And then all of a sudden, Devin White is not active for any of the games in the regular season. He doesn't play special teams, which certainly doesn't help his case in getting on the field. And ultimately, the Eagles part ways with him. When you look at this entire situation, the fact that Devin White was playing so many of those first string snaps in training camp to all of a sudden not playing at all during the regular season and not even being active, how do you feel like this went so wrong for the Eagles?
Yeah, I think it starts with the off-season evaluation when you're trying to figure out where this went wrong. The Eagles were kind of late to the party when it comes to off-ball linebackers in free agency. There's obviously a position that they had to address. And again, they kind of missed out on that first wave or two in free agency. And listen, Devin White, when you looked at him as a free agent, when you looked at, the potential fit that he would have with the Eagles, I think you can understand the swing that they took, but you understand the risk that they took there as well. He came from a Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense that is led by Todd Bowles, a really good defensive coach, obviously the head coach there now. If you fall in favor with Todd Bowles, and I do think that is a little bit of a red flag. So, my read on this at this point is that the emergence of Zach Bond helped them kind of mask this mistake that they made in free agency. But listen, let's make no mistake about it. This was a mistake in free agency. This was a miscalculation. They signed him early in free agency. Again, I know that they missed on the first couple waves, but they signed him in March. And I think throughout training camp, the reason that he was playing so much is probably because they were hoping that he figured something out, rekindled something. And I think for all of us, it was maybe not apparent in the moment, but looking back at it for sure, you could kind of notice that Nakobe Dean made more plays throughout training camp than Devin White. So I understand how they got here, but listen, this was a linebacking core that struggled for most of last year, and they have struggled at times this year as well. The fact that Devin White couldn't bolster that group, couldn't be, a real factor in that group is definitely an indictment on the offseason move.
I think the big question that some fans might have right now is like, okay, without Devin White, who is going to be that backup to Zach Bond or Nakobe Dean if they were to go down? And the answer is that they have always had that plan because White has never been active for a game. And even last week, we saw for the very first time Jeremiah Trotter Jr. taking defensive snaps against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He only took 3, and one of them was for a kneel down. But still, it was just kind of late in the game in relief of some of the veterans that had come out. At that point, Zach Bond had come out. But we see that, okay, that they're starting to work him in at least a little bit. Perhaps he is the primary backup. The Eagles also have Oren Burks at their disposal, who throughout his 7-year NFL career has primarily been a special teams contributor. However, he also has defensive experience at playing inside linebacker. So the Eagles have some options there in the wake of Devin White's release. So it'll be interesting to see how they choose to move forward as they continue to develop some of these younger pieces, particularly Trotter Jr. Now, EJ, let's talk a little bit about how the Eagles have spent this past bye week. We know after speaking with Nick Sirianni, Vic Fangio, Kellen Moore coming off of the Buccaneers game that the Eagles had a lot to work on. They're standing at 2-2 right now. There's a lot of different areas of improvement that they need to start to iron out some of the kinks on both sides of the ball. To me, in my opinion, one of the biggest areas that they need to focus on going into this upcoming week and going into the second quarter of their season is the fact that they've had so many really slow starts in all 4 of their first games this season. The first quarter has been a really tough time for the Eagles. They are the only team right now in the league that has not scored any points in the first quarter, which is pretty staggering to think about. Their opening drives in particular have been really just, I mean, like a disaster. It's been really difficult to see the fact that they just haven't been able to get into a rhythm in any of their drives, only picking up one first down through four of those opening drives. I think they have 12 net yards of offense across 13 plays. So something right now isn't working, isn't clicking. Perhaps, it certainly does not help that the Eagles have not had all three, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, and Layden Johnson this past week against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Obviously, Brown has missed the last three games too. I don't know if it's as easy as a fix as just getting those guys back. I think it will help. But Kellen Moore already said that it's going to be a big focus of his this past bye week to dig into those things and to try to figure out exactly what went wrong. So that's what I'm most curious to see, how the Eagles respond this upcoming week against the Browns. EJ, what are you going to be keeping an eye on as the Eagles move forward here in terms of an area that they need to improve in?
Yeah, I would say the run defense is really going to be an interesting thing to monitor. That game against the New Orleans Saints felt like maybe this was the Eagles defense turning the corner and being able, to find ways to stop the run. And, after the Bucks loss, it became apparent that that Saints game was more, a matter of context, basically the context around it was more informative than anything else. I think that this team is going to struggle to stop teams, who want to run the football out of light personnel packages. The Saints, are kind of the exception to that rule. They're a team that likes to run the ball out of heavy personnel packages that the Eagles could match with their base defense. So more specifically, I want to see how the Eagles are going to stop the run out of nickel personnel, out of dime personnel, that, if it comes to that, but especially nickel personnel. I wonder if it's going to be personnel changes. There's reports out there that Cooper DeJean might be the starting nickel cornerback moving forward. I think he could help. I think Sidney Brown could factor into that eventually. Now that he's making his return from injured or from the physically unable to perform list. So I mean, this is a team that's ranked 28th in yards per attempt allowed right now. The rest of their stats are harder to like really kind of quantify because they just came off the bye week, but they've given up a ton of explosive rushing plays, and again, they have really struggled. I know that the defense in general has struggled, but the run defense for me is where it has to start. Vic Fangio has talked about earning the right to rush the passer. Kind of honestly, most defensive coaches would tell you if they can get into second and long and third and long situations, that's really where defensive coordinators can kind of get in their bag. They can start to maybe make some creative play calls, maybe be more aggressive. But if you're giving up 4 or 5 yards, I mean, they're giving up 5 yards, per attempt right now. When you're giving up 5 yards per attempt, you don't get to be creative and be aggressive. If you're in second and five, if you're in third and one, those are downs where the offense has the advantage. So, I really think that those early down, run situations are going to be the key for this defense. And I'm curious to see, what changes they will be brought on by the fact that they've been able to self scout and kind of make some adjustments.
Yeah, me too. I'm interested to see what they do. I know talking to Vic Fangio after that game, he talked about how much better the front played, and I understand they use more of those six-man fronts that we hadn't seen to that point in the season yet. That said, that group played so much better against the run, and it took a lot of the pressure off of the second level of the defense to make and the third level, just making those tackles that can be a little bit more tricky. And I think the Eagles have had they've struggled with missed tackles too. So eliminating that factor was a big help. We'll see if they're able to kind of replicate that success going forward. I think another big issue that the Eagles need to address going into the second quarter of their schedule is, and Nick Sirianni talked about this too, is Jalen Hurts' turnovers, his interceptions, his fumbles. He currently has thrown 4 interceptions this season, which is tied for the third highest quantity in the league among quarterbacks. And then, of course, 5 fumbles, tied for the first place there, and then 3 fumbles lost. So when you look at kind of the entire body of work, Sirianni spoke about this too. Not all turnovers are exclusively on the quarterback. However, because he is the quarterback, because the ball is in his hands on every single play, his actions are going to be scrutinized the most. According to Pro Football Focus, 6.7% of Hurts' passing attempts have been turnover worthy plays, and that's a subjective stat. But EJ, I know you took a look at every single one of those turnovers and a handful of those turnover worthy plays to see exactly what the root cause, if anything, might be, at least something to kind of chalk up exactly why Hurts has been turning the ball over. When you took a look at those plays, what did you learn through that?
Yeah, I think there are definitely some common denominators. I know that that's not necessarily the nature of a common denominator, is that you can have multiple of them, but I think a lot of them came down to two different things. The first one being risk taking, sometimes out of structure of the play, sometimes within the structure of the play, but just decision making and risk taking. A couple of the early ones, like if you think about the two interceptions against the Packers, I would say both of those are just Jalen trying to do too much. The first one is trying to throw the ball to Devontae Smith on a 3rd and 15, I believe it was. And he's not open. He's running up the seam in the middle of the field, and he's tightly covered, and there's a safety over the top. That's just a case of Jalen being a little bit overly aggressive, trying to make something happen in a situation where, yeah, there might be a little bit of pressing because it's 3rd and long. His interception later in that game to AJ Brown, kind of the same thing. Throwing down in the middle of the field late is never something you want to do as a quarterback. He didn't really step into the throw; he floated it. That's another thing that I noticed watching them back is a lot of his interceptions are kind of the result of not being able to step into a throw for whether it's pressure or because he's rolling out. So and again, the interception against the Falcons, a week later was also an example where he wasn't able to step into the throw. He's throwing the ball to Devontae Smith, who's tightly covered. So I definitely think risk taking in high leverage situations is something that is a common thing with the Hurts interceptions. Honestly, it's probably the most concerning one. Because you want your quarterback to be able to deliver in those instances, whether it's 3rd and long, whether it's late game situations, game winning drives. That's where you want your quarterback to be the most, at his best. You want him to be the most, decisive and discerning with where he's going to go with the football. Hurts has struggled there at times this season. I think the other category that really comes up is pocket awareness and protection breakdowns. A lot of the fumbles have happened that way, whether it's, with Jalen rolling out with the ball in one hand and getting, tripped up against the Saints, or the Tampa Bay Buccaneers fumble. Like I've heard some people say that the Bucks fumble maybe isn't solely on him. Saquon Barkley, was trying to pass protect against Levante David. Honestly, I think the context matters there. Levante David is an All-Pro linebacker. You can't expect Saquon Barkley, as good as he's been, to hold up in pass protection against a linebacker that good. So I understand why Hurts wanted to get the ball. Grant Calcaterra was open down the field, but I think that that's another case of decision making and pocket awareness, not knowing that the guy is behind you. The last thing I'd say is that like there are some external factors. There are some things that Hurts can't control, like Cam Jordan snapping the ball to him when he's not ready is a good example. And that interception against the Saints, I think you put a little bit of that on Devontae Smith. So there are times where the turnovers aren't solely on Hurts, but honestly, for every turnover that wasn't solely on Hurts, there were turnover-worthy plays. As you mentioned earlier, Pro Football Focus tracks, plays that should have probably resulted in turnovers. And for every one of the Hurts's turnovers that maybe aren't solely on him, there's a turnover-worthy play that he was fortunate to not have on his record. So I think that his turnover numbers are deserved. I think again, those are kind of the main themes, and I think I think that it is going to have to be a mentality shift to a certain degree with Hurts. I think especially in those big moments, you don't want him to force the issue. The offense has enough talent that he shouldn't have to force the issue in those situations.
Be really interested to see how, well, I guess we're not going to see, we're going to be able to see the results of it potentially, but it'll be interesting to learn a little bit more, perhaps by talking to Hertz, by talking to Kellen Moore about how exactly they're going about coaching him to cut down on those kind of, hero ball type of decisions late in games, especially on third and long scenarios where it might just be more value. It might be the safer decision to just punt the ball and live to see another day instead of turning it over potentially. So very curious to see how this week goes and how the Eagles respond coming out of the bye week at 2-2. So that's going to do it for us, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for Game Day Central Extra, and we will see you next time.